My name is Anupam Sa. I'm the head of Art Conservation Research and Training at the Chhatrapati Shivaji Maharaj Vastu Sangrahalaya. A pleasure for me to be your host this evening. And before Ms. Desai weaves her stories around the Kashmir shawls, it is my privilege on behalf of the chairman of the Board of Trustees of this museum, on behalf of the director and the senior curators of this museum, to welcome all of you. The event this evening is a lecture by Mrs. Aditi Desai. She's been working over more than 35 years in this field, and her association has been also with various educational institutions. Lady Irwin College, the Delhi School of Economics, Hindu College. Other than that, then she's been working with various NGOs, whether it was Seva, even the Johns Hopkins University. And then there has been a long period in which Ms. Desai has also been associated with various arms of the United Nations. There are 4 or 5 of them that can be listed. What she has also been doing is, other than working with the material aspects of the textiles and colors, but she has also been associated with the people who create these fabrics. So when I suppose when Ms. Desai speaks, it is not in terms of information that she has gleaned over the years. She's not just a repository of casual bits of information related to textiles, but I think she has a deep understanding because she's been associated with the people who create these textiles. And not just the people, she's a sociologist. I think Ms. Desai, as a sociologist, has had also the training and also has the sensitivity to work with the communities, with their oral traditions, and with the dynamics that make up a vibrant culture like ours. And equally vibrant are some of the fabrics she has here with us. And we request you to regale us with tales of the history of Kashmir shawls, the development of the motifs, and pepper it with a bit of Europe to bring the world to us. Thank you very much.
Welcome to all of you and a very good evening. Thank you for coming and listening to me, who is a person who fell in love with shawls when she was barely 12 years old. I would like to first thank Mr. Shirsagar, who just presented me with the book. It was his encouragement and faith, without really knowing much about me, to invite me to speak to all of you here. And then the director, Mr. Sabyasachi Mukherjee, I'm really grateful for you for also having the faith and taking the bold step of not wasting any time and saying, please come and do a lecture. Of course, every day brings a new learning experience for me, because I'm in touch with 30 to 40 Najibabadi families of Rafugars and many, many Kashmiri families. The subject of Kashmir shawl is a very, very vast subject. And Kashmir shawl, as we know it today, the history at least spans 500 to 600 years. But shawls and woolens were worn in India and in all the colder climates in one form or another for centuries. It goes back to pre-Buddhist times, and in fact in Mahabharata and Ramayana, many references are there. Very few fragments have survived. They are also there in sculpture, and later you find them in paintings and miniatures, and many other references are there. So we can say that these have been there for a long time. I'm going to tell you a little story. This is a shawl made out of fragments from really 500 years of different shawls. The Rafugars, who are the darners or the restorers of old shawls, they found them in different houses and riyasats and, with nawabs and so on. So they would make shawls out of these larger shawls, make smaller shawls and sell them to people who didn't have access to them before, let's say, 1940s. And one of the Rafugars with whom I was associated, his grandfather had kept aside some fragments, his great-grandfather, and he put together this shawl, which has become like a menu shawl. So sometimes when I have to speak, I just take one shawl, because if you see the center panel, which is striped, that's called Khatras design. It's in very fine, thin, lightweight pashmina with small, small flowers. And then it's surrounded by borders from the Sikh period, the Afghan period, the Dogra period, and so on. So he said that he would like to sell this to me, because he says, I know that you're not going to sell it further. And, and for me it was really like a gift from God that he gave it to me. So when we talk about the shawl, we have to first talk about Kashmir, because it is intrinsically linked with Kashmir, and not just Kashmir, it's culture. And the culture is one of what we call our Ganga Jamuna Tehzeeb, or a syncretic culture. So you can imagine this place, which is likened by poets to paradise on earth. It was coveted, loved, and visited by people from all over the world. Many dynasties ruled Kashmir. And it was, so, that's why I've called it the lure of Kashmir. It sort of attracted people like a magnet. And it had lots of things to offer, not just natural beauty, but lots of sports, handicrafts, natural products, flowers, saffron, honey, precious stones, all kinds of, like you had carpets and this, that, and the other. And this Ganga Jamna Tehzeeb of Kashmir is reflected in its monuments, which are very, very ancient. Some go back to 13th century, 14th century, and so on and so forth. So you have many, I've just put a few of them to give you an idea that how it is not just that it was Hindu and then it became Muslim. It's not like black and white. There's the Sun Temple, there's the Hazrat Bal Mosque where the hair of the Prophet is kept. There is Pari Mahal where Dara Shikoh, which he built as a library, and then there's also a dargah of his patron saint. But it's a very unique kind of architecture also. So not just that this culture is exhibited in its architecture and its other things, but it's also exhibited, it's also visible in its syncretic culture. They had, I'm just going to talk about a few characters. Lal Der, she is the Mirabai of Kashmir. And today, till date, children, like we sing Kabir songs and bhajans, similarly, the children of Kashmir, even the modern children, they know that this is Lal Der. And she was a Shaivite ascetic who would, even dance naked. It didn't bother her. She said, Kashmir is so beautiful, the sky is my odhani, and the flowers and the trees are my clothes. Why do I need to wear anything? And she became very close to Nuruddin Wali, who was born in Kashmir, but he was much younger than her. When he grew up and became into a saint, he and she became very, very close. And they used to have lots of debates and so on and so forth. So there are all these khankas and mosques and other things. And these people were Sufi mystics. So the Shaivite mystics and Sufi mystics shared a common bond. It didn't seem like there were two separate religions which were opposed to one another, because they were not dogmatic, hardcore Hindu or Muslim ideologies. And so you have, for example, Kheer Bhavani Temple, Amarnath, then Buddhist, the whole tantric culture of the Buddhist monks was also very much a part of the Kashmir story. Lots and lots of people were traveling and coming into Kashmir. There were pilgrims from China, There were, these Buddhists who were coming, people were coming from Iran. So Sheikh Hamdan comes to Kashmir from Iran, from Hamadan. He was a Persian Sufi scholar. He brings with him 700 Persian craftsmen and 113 crafts. And then he visits Ladakh. So most of the Pashmina comes from the Tibetan plateau, part of which is in Ladakh. He visits Ladakh and he finds these very poor Changma and Changpa tribes who are rearing the Pashmina goat and the various kinds of sheep and so on and so forth. Till then, there was no Pashmina in the Kashmir Valley. Wool was very important, but the wool was from various kinds of goat and sheep, which were easily ranging at lower heights within Kashmir. So he saw the plight of these poor people who were taking a lot of effort to raise these Pashmina goats, and he said, I'll try and help you. So he brought some little bit of Pashmina from there. He himself used to not take any money from anyone. He presented those socks made from the Pashmina wool that he got from there to the Sultan. This was the Shami dynasty that was ruling Kashmir at that time. And he gave him the socks and he said, please try to do something for these poor people. They were from Swat. Sultan, who was his successor, he was the one actually who was later came to be known as the Akbar of Kashmir. So around 1450s or so, Zainul Abidin was his name. So Zainul Abidin is remembered very fondly even till date because he built a mausoleum to his mother. But there's this Zaina Kadal bridge which leads into the old town. That is very famous. He was a great lover of arts and crafts. And he got many Turkistani weavers to upgrade the skills of the Kashmiri craftsmen. People were coming vast distances to come and work, teach, learn, go back, etc. So in his time, the carpet weavers that came from Turkestan, they used to weave carpets with this Kani technique. So they taught it to the weavers who were weaving shawls, because shawls were being woven in Kashmir for a long time. Those people were making on carpets, they started making on shawls, but basically it means that you have to make a pattern. And the pattern is actually done with little tiny sticks. Each stitch is woven at one time. So you take two threads and you insert this little wooden stick, which is a thicker version of a toothpick called toji or tojili, and the Pashmina thread, and you insert it, and after two threads you take it out and you wrap the thread, and it goes on like that. So suppose you need 4 stitches of pink, then you put 4 stitches of pink, and then the next color, let's say, is red, that will interlock with the pink, and then let's say 2 stitches. So literally a book has to be written. It's called the Talim for every stitch of the shawl, from one end of the shawl to the other end. So it's a very time-consuming process to make any shawl, because it's made one stitch at a time. So 2 or 3 people sit on a bench and they are hunched over this basic simple loom on which the warp is spread. You see all their various implements. You know, there's the hukka and the kangri, because remember, Kashmir is also very famous for its crafts, because most of the time they are confined to their homes. But what happens actually when somebody is making a shawl that takes 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, 4 years? Imagine a person sitting from morning till night, day after day, year after year, making one shawl. They become like Sufis themselves, and they were greatly respected in their community. They are called Khandwa. In Kashmiri, the weaver is called Khandwa, because that act of weaving is like worshipping, is like doing the jap, like doing the mala. They develop this kind of spiritual attitude, which only with that attitude can you do this. So this technique, as I told you, is the weft. That means the warp is plain and the weft is what forms the pattern. And it's called, abroad it's called tapestry weaving. Just to show the front and the back. And I've just juxtaposed it with a French shawl which came later, where the threads go from one end to the other because they are done on a loom where the shuttle is passing, the threads are picked up, and then the shuttle passes, and that creates the pattern. So at the back you have threads going from one end to the other end, and they are cut off at once the shawl is complete. So you just feel a kind of a velvety ridge. Because the shawls were copied in the West, mid-18th century onwards, from the front you couldn't make out that whether this is Indian or it is European. But from the back you can make out. The other thing about making a shawl is that you cannot do it by yourself. One person cannot do it. There's many people involved. I say 14 specialists, but it's many more if you count the person who's actually producing the pashmina also. I've just put a few pictures. One is of the talim, which is at the end on the top. That is a person who is washing the shawl. So after years of making, the shawl gathers a lot of material. Tea stains, coffee stains, mud, dung of goat, dust, all kinds of things, oil, kangri, the ash, and whatnot. And it has starch, and the starch is not the starch that we use, which is rice starch. It is like saresh, which is like what you stick the leather chappals. It's very sticky and hard, and it has to be beaten by feet, and it has to be washed in running waters of the Kashmir River. So Kashmir River is a major actor in the production of a shawl. And the shawl gets polished with the dust of the rocks that is in the water. When the water, they beat it and they put it in the water like this, and the water is going over the shawl and it is washing it. If you try to do this in the house, the shawl will be torn to shreds, I assure you. I want to say something about the charkha here. The charkha was used to spin the wool, and there was a stage. Of course, Gandhiji's movement helped a lot in that, and also in popularizing pashmina, but charkha was there from a long time before. Every home, however wealthy, everybody's house had a charkha. And the women used to actually spin, and later on the women used to also take out the hair. They clean the wool, they take out the hair from the pashmina, the raw wool, and then they spin it when the shawl is made. And they told me this story, that we have made our sons into IAS officers and judges. With the small amount of money they used to get 4 annas or 8 annas or a rupee to clean the shawl after it was made, or from the spinning, because they also had a lot of time on their hands. And it was a cooperative exercise. 14, 15 people were involved in the making of a shawl. So, if anything happens in Kashmir, it means the entire industry collapses, which is what has happened right now. It's not just a weaver sitting in his house making a shawl. Somebody has to get the wool, somebody has to dye the wool, somebody has to spin it, somebody has to put it on the loom, somebody has to starch it, then somebody has to weave it. So all these 14, 15 specialists are required till the shawl is complete. After that, the washerman, even the ironing of a shawl is done by a special person. And today it costs about 1,500 to 2,000 rupees in Kashmir just to wash the shawl and iron it. And when something happens here, they say, don't do it yourself. I send it to Kashmir to get it done. So, after Zainul Abidin, the next person who took a lot of interest in Kashmir and in shawls was Akbar. So he set up workshops, Delhi, Agra, Lahore. Shawls were classified, the colors were, he really took a lot of interest. And he got the shawls made, which were kept aside in the Toshakhana, and they were given gifts. In those days, shawls were not considered something that you could buy or sell. There was no trade, no business associated with the shawl. It was something that conferred prestige on the receiver and the giver. And till today, even in very modern functions, like even a military function, people are given shawls. So that has remained something that we confer prestige on the receiver by giving them a shawl. The design, if you see the 4 swatches below each period, they signify how it all started and where it all went in 200-300 years. So it started with a very small border. Now this is not an original Mughal piece. I have copied one of the earliest pieces. This is 1680 of just a flower, a natural flower with a root. So it's just 1 or 2 colors and leaves and a stem. So very naturalistic with a small border on the side. This is much bigger. Very tiny border, maybe less than, not even a centimeter wide, but very thin, fine pashmina and very, so imagine that much decoration was also considered so difficult to achieve. Slowly, because the shawl keeps advancing and there are many people with many ideas, hundreds of flowers in Kashmir, so all these flowers are being made. As we reach the Afghan period, and you can see the size of the border becoming bigger and bigger. And in the Afghan period, by the time we come to the Afghan period, which is 1750s, the flower has got converted into a paisley shape, a kairi shape. But basically, this shape, which is known the world over as paisley shape, evolves during the Afghan period. Then we go into the Sikh period, Bhuta becomes higher, and another border appears on the top, and a corner ornament appears. In all the Afghan shawls, the corner ornament is not there. Some of them have it, the later ones. That corner ornament could be woven or could be embroidered, because embroidery also enters the repertoire of shawls around the time of 1840s. And then the last one, the design, the woven design takes over the entire shawl. And these are very large shawls. They're 3.5 meters long. So this is how the Bhuta actually evolves. I've taken many more swatches to show you the transition. And free flowering plant, that is the earliest, before that one. Then a composite flower, but still standing straight. The flower, as you can see at the top, is big and it starts tilting little to the side, but not too much. There is nothing in between. They are just free-floating flowers, big ones, on the pallas. They become bigger and bigger, as you can see. And then that kind of composite flower emerges, which has got a vase at the bottom and a plate below the vase. Till then, there is a root. After that, there is something else. And the tip, a tip is formed. There's a little tendril of leaves that forms a tip. That tip will start turning inwards now. So, in the Afghan period, in these, the red shawl, for example, I've got a palla here, which is very unusual. And they are called Jaipuri and Agra shawls because the Mughals were ruling in these areas. And the same motifs were used on their palaces, they were used on their textiles, they were used many different, in their paintings and so on and so forth. So then the tip starts curling inwards. By the way, all these are full shawls that I have. And you can see in the next one, which is 1820s, there are 2 or 3 lines. They're kind of going downward. Every 5 years there is some change. And then the tip starts moving downwards. That's kind of the beginning of the Sikh period. Maharaja Ranjit Singh takes over Lahore in 1799. But in 1819, he takes over Kashmir, full Kashmir, and makes it a part of Punjab. So till 1850s, Kashmir is part of Punjab. So the tip starts going downwards, and then it goes sharply down like a sword. This is the Sikh period. And various kinds of designs emerge placed on top of it, and then the paisleys start cutting, they start overlapping. And then you come to the Dogra period, where the paisley becomes like a scroll, like an S-shaped scroll. This is what was happening with the pallas. in the main body of the shawl also there were little flowers. There was field, plain field in between. And this is one of the earliest, the low ones, they are also called Jaipuri shawls. This is what was happening in the body of the shawl once they started making all over shawls, or they were making cloths. They were called khilats or shawl cloth lengths, which were used to make jackets. And it was part of courtly attire during the Mughal time, so everybody was wearing and you can see that in paintings as well. This also was very popular. Like you had the little booties, you had what they call, popularly it's called khatras, but actually the word is khatrast, which means straight road. Basically, that's what it means. And this panel is from the shawl that you saw at the beginning. This is actually from Jahangir's time. But if you look at pictures, even Iranian Qajar paintings and others, you will find that it was really popular all over Persia, India, amongst the Mughals, during the Mughal period and so on. And it continued. So when we talk about periods, we are talking about these various dynasties or powers that ruled Kashmir. But Mughal presence was in India till 1857, though it became a very weakened power, but it still remained. And the sensibilities of the Mughals ruling in Awadh, in Hyderabad and Bengal and other places, all those had, Banaras, they all had their own particular, fondness for certain things. I like turquoise color, I was wearing that scarf. That is more a Hyderabadi color, the fondness for turquoise or pink or whatever. So these are kind of late Mughal shawls, which I'm very proud to possess. Original, that's like around the turn of the century. It has small little red lines. It is there in Tapi collection, just the body part, and the palla part is in a different shawl. So you can see the number of buttas. That is what they call pur matan. That means the whole shawl is covered with small flowers, and there are buttas in the middle. Mostly the shawls are plain, and they had decoration only at the ends. The ones with the decoration on the body were very rare and very special and very expensive even for those times, and really were meant for very, high level people. So you see in these very early paintings, that is a 16th century painting, there's a Pir, a Sufi saint, who's probably wearing a tush shawl with a little Kani border. And the patkas were there, the zari patkas were there, and then they also were being made, the same things were being made in Pashmina and tush. And that's a Hyderabadi, that's 1570s. So that's also a very early one of the Hyderabadi rulers with, you can see patka, shawl, green shawl with the yellow border, etc. And here are people sitting. This is also very early painting. I've taken it off a book. We are going to talk about moon shawls. They are wearing moon shawls, which are square shawls. Square shawls came later, and they were again something that the Europeans liked a lot. But you see in this earlier painting, Indian is wearing moon shawls. And that is Shah Jahan also wearing a jacket made of Pashmina material with little flowers. This is just at the time when the Afghans are coming. So many things happen. It is a revolutionary time. And it, of course, affects the shawl. And the shawl also affects the incidents as well. So mid-1700s was a watershed in the development of the shawl industry, and many dramatic changes took place. There was great political turmoil in North India, with various powers like the Marathas, the Afghans, the Mughal Subedars, and the British competing weakened Mughal empire. The Afghans take over Kashmir and impose a very brutal regime in which they tax the shawl very highly. So much so that before you start making a shawl, you had to pay 30% ad valorem duty on the finished sale price of the shawl. They had an army to feed, and they said shawl is the most precious item. So how do we make money? We tax the shawl. as a result of this and various other things, the shawl becomes a commodity. And for the first time, it passes from an item of patronage where the kings and the emperors getting the shawls made, looking after all the weavers and all the various people, feeding them, keeping them, and giving them as gifts, it becomes something that can be bought and sold. So hundreds of private karkhanas or workshops spring up in Kashmir. They start making shawls. However, there is this pressure on them not only to make shawls, but to pay this duty, and plus, if they are going to send it abroad, for which there was a big market, then they would have to contend with the guys who were guarding the frontiers, and they would have to pay another 25% as bribes to those policemen or army guys who were guarding the frontiers. Number two, the British defeated Siraj-ud-Daulah in Battle of Plassey in 1757. And the Diwani of Bengal is given to them by the Mughal emperor. And this made Calcutta gradually the center of shawl trade, because Calcutta becomes the British capital. And all the rich and famous, they all gather there. All the kings, like later on, they built big, big houses, palaces in Delhi. At that time, everybody built their big mahal in Calcutta. And we also have to remember that the Suba of Bengal stretched, it was very big. It contained a lot of Bihar and contained many parts of UP, barring Awadh and Rampur, and leaving Punjab, till the Marathas started advancing and taking over, it really stretched right up to Peshawar. So that was the Suba of Bengal. Another major thing that happens is that a guy who is called Najib Khan, he was a Pakhtunwa from Peshawar, he came to India. Now there were Afghan populations living in different parts of India, but the major area where they were living was called Rohilkhand area in UP. So his mama was living there, he comes and joins him there, and all these people are being driven out because just before that, we have had the sack of Delhi by Nadir Shah. And Nadir Shah has also taken over Afghanistan, and he's driving these people out. So he, as a soldier, he takes 50 of his soldier friends. He's a guy with great leadership qualities. He comes to Rohilkhand area, and very soon he becomes the favorite of the Mughal emperor, this weakened Mughal emperor at Delhi. And he fights many battles and wins many battles on behalf of the Delhi state, including the Battle of Panipat later. He defeats all these Mughal satraps who were raising their heads against the throne at Delhi. He helps to quell all those people. He defeats Safdar Jung and all these other, even Siraj-ud-Daulah from Awadh and so on. And he fights the Marathas and these other people and wins the Battle of Panipat. He becomes a very important person. He becomes in charge of Delhi. But then he's given this in charge of this area, this entire area, Saharanpur, Dehradun, large tracts of both sides of the Ganga, and he's made the governor of that Suba. And he develops that place, sets up canals and gardens and agriculture, because that was a very swampy area in the base of the hills. But most of the time he spent in Delhi. So only 5 years he spent in Najibabad, building the town of Najibabad and building many monuments. They are very fabulous monuments. And because this whole area is disturbed, the Sikhs are rising, the Jats are rising, the Marathas are moving up. So all this confusion and battles are going on. He opens a shawl route from Kashmir via Najibabad towards Bengal, through which all the caravans used to pass. And the caravans used to be, 60, 70 people carrying the shawls sometimes. So he builds this. Now today, if you see this, it is in shambles. If you see it, you feel like crying. It's nothing like that. That looks like Taj Mahal. And look at that. That's the palace gate in Najibabad. He built many, many monuments. This is in 1857, this drawing was done. He built it in 1750s. This is 100 years later. And after 1947, it's like, what should I say, a slum. So what happens is that these Najibabadis, who were soldiers, because by this time there was no need required for any fighting. So these guys had become extremely impoverished and they didn't know any other work other than fighting. So they start, somebody opens a little cycle shop, somebody does this, that and the other. And when the caravans start passing, in fact near this Charminar there is a Baradari and there was a place, a horse where horses could drink water, and a sarai, a caravan sarai. They start accompanying these guys. You know, all these years I didn't write a book because this was a query in my mind, that how did these Najibabadi soldiers become the best rafugars in India? And today in Kashmir, there's not one rafugar left. If they want rafugars, they are calling Najibabadis to come and train them in workshops. Nobody understands actually that it takes years and years to learn rafugari. These guys started accompanying them towards Bengal. And they slowly got exposed to other riyasats because the Kashmiris would stop, sell shawls here, sell shawls there, go there, and they went as laborers to carry the load, to open the potlis, tie the potlis. But once they were there, they said, why should I pay this guy and waste his time? So they said, come and learn some rafu. Because to carry rafugars from Kashmir all the way to Bengal was very difficult. So these guys who were cheap labor for them, they said learn rafugari, and sitting with these Kashmiris year after year, every winter they used to go, or 6 months they used to spend there, they became expert rafugars. And some of them settled down. I mean, they settled down in different places, but they also became aware of the possibilities because this was not giving them enough money. So the beginnings of the trade of repair and trade of old shawls started. Then on their own later, 100 years later, they started actually visiting these riyasats on their own when the train came and started going to these homes of these Nawabs and Rajas and picking up the old shawls. The tattered and torn ones, they'd say, just take it. We don't want it. They would charge 500 rupees, give them a potli of torn shawls, but they were very important because the really good ones, they wanted them to repair, change the cloth, make a man shawl into a lady shawl. That's how all these shawls that I have, the old shawls, that's how it was these people. And it was these people who have supplied shawls to every museum in India. They were all sourced by the Najibabadis. The Kashmiris, you will not find a single old shawl. So now we come to the Afghan period proper in terms of the design. We are saying how the design is also changing. So Afghan period was also marked by muted colors, red, blue, white, little bit of ochre, and blue was this Prussian blue. What I wanted to show in this is that every shawl actually has a pattern which has a name. This is called Machli Kar. So the number of buttas start decreasing slowly. And this is a European shawl which is an exact copy. They have used flour to make it look like a fish bone. That is the central bone, and the little olive flowers, or in that the blue iris flower, that is the same in that also. There's a central spine which is made up of flowers. This is made in Paisley actually, which was one of the centers in Scotland of shawl weaving in 1810 or so. So these are some of the Afghan period shawls. That one is by the way, Tour de Force. It's really amazing. It's in pinks and it's full, it's in one piece. So to avoid paying the tax, what they started doing was, because these inspectors would come around every 10 days and say, how far has the shawl progressed, how far has the shawl progressed? They were trying to intimidate them. So they would just make a little bit and take it off the loom and then start again. So shawls started being made in pieces. That means side border separately, palla separately. So for joining together, they needed rafugar. Now there are many theories about rafugars. My own theory, from talking to so many people over so many years, is that rafugars were always required. Rafugars were embroiderers also, because they are the master of the needle, how to hold the needle, how to have so much control that it goes exactly one thread up, down, this way, that way, whatever, to create anything with that. Another thing happened in the world of shawls is the birth of a square shawl. They became a big fashion thing because they could be folded as a triangle and worn over the shoulders. You may have seen in many pictures and in films, etc. British ladies and French ladies wearing the... So basically there's a central medallion which is called the moon. It may look like the sun sometimes. 4 quarter moons. But the difficulty of making this is an earlier piece, it's got actually a flower. But this white border on the side is absolutely exquisite. And it was completely gone. And it is completely restored. You cannot make out. It looks like it's just come off the loom now. That Rafugar is so good. This is an amazing shawl also. Just salmon pink, blue, many, many different kinds of flowers. And everything is woven, even the lines are woven, it is not embroidered with the Kani stitch. Absolutely exquisite piece, and it is influenced by Hyderabad, by Kalamkari, French influence. Recently, the same exact design came in a Dorukha Palledar shawl to me. And I said, oh, I've got this in Pashmina. And the guy said, Madam, your Pashmina thicker shawl is better than the Dorukha shawl, though it was 3 times the price. So, and it is ruffled in certain places because probably it was from a jacket. You can't make out where the ruffle is because those joins and those ruffles that they did at that time were absolutely mind-blowing. Unless you look with a magnifying glass or a microscope, you cannot see where the joining is. So this is another moon shawl, and what I'm trying to show here is little birds flying across the sky, geese. That one is a superb paisley in one of those rare shawls made in Pashmina. Actually, it has a bit of silk in it as well. And that is a French shawl. That is not an Indian shawl. And it has the same border that shawl I showed you just now, that other red moon shawl had. This has the same border as that. Now, I thought it was raw loom, jacquard loom, and that's it. But the real story is that they had actually used children and nuns in nunneries, the young nuns, because they had thin fingers, to do some insertions by hand. You know, they had orphanages. And these orphanages used to, in fact, I was in Florence doing a workshop, and I found out that there were shawls being made there. And these children were actually, because they had such strict laws against child labor, even at that time, in the 19th century, that it was never disclosed. And even the French manufacturers who were manufacturing the most amazing copies of Indian shawls, as well as making their own originals, which were also being put in exhibitions and given prizes and so on, like works of art, it was a secret. How these shawls became what they became, how they are so beautiful, because they had elements of something, some magic touch being given to them. Empress Josephine, Napoleon's wife, received some shawls as gifts, and she fell in love with them. And then she started ordering. The moment they start being made in Kashmir, in these various workshops, her appetite knew no bounds, from 100 to 400 shawls a year. And imagine, a shawl took 2 to 3 years to make. So, and the espionage that was being done by British officers was actually on shawls and Pashmina gold, because it was something that would give them a huge amount of monetary benefit. In fact, as an aside, for 150 years they tried to naturalize the Pashmina goat in Scotland, but they didn't succeed, in France also. Later in the Dogra period, tribute to Queen Victoria, 2 pairs of Kashmir shawls, 2 Arabic horses, and 20 pounds of Pashmina wool was the annual tribute the Kashmir Maharaja gave to the British. There is no item of craft in the world which compares with the Kashmir shawl. You can tell me what it is. I would like to know. And really, when you see them, you see the old pieces, they take your breath away. They really take your breath away. It was not for any this thing. I was just a little girl. I just saw my mother's friend wearing a shawl, and I said, I want to get one for my mother. I put all my pocket money, everything together. I said, send this man to my house. He came on a tanga. From then onwards, every winter afternoon, I was sitting with these guys, looking through shawls, persuading my mother, please buy, please buy, please buy. And then putting my money together and buying one shawl, So, and that addiction never went away. It just became worse and worse. So, you can see this is a shawl in my collection. I just got a pallu, but it is exactly the same that Empress Josephine is wearing. This is the beautiful Empress Josephine, again wearing some other shawls. And these are paintings. This is somebody selling shawls to, elite society ladies. And all these ladies are wearing Kashmir shawls. None of them are machine made. These are all square and long shawls, and you can see that they are plain with the pallas. This is all mostly Afghan period shawls. This is like early 19th century, late 18th century fashion already in France. So first the Kashmir shawls go west. They start ordering shawls for the empress, for other people, other royal families, because it became, in that whole region, the most cherished thing to have. And, a woman without a shawl, a nice Kashmir shawl, was not considered a woman of substance, just like in Bengal later. And you have these paintings, and there are stories behind each one of these shawls, For example, this one, this was owned by Dega. This shawl was owned by Dega. Now, I bought a shawl, the same panels of which that entire shawl are made. I bought a shawl which is an early Bhuta, and panels of the same exact shawl. It's not that one shawl was made. At least two shawls used to be made of one type, at least two. That's why they were called do shala, two shawls. And they were worn back to back, because the back, they didn't want to show the back. But this was by men. See, the interesting thing is that in India, women didn't wear shawls, men wore the shawls. And it was part of court attire and for, gala functions and all. And also because they were given as gift, because the king wanted to see them wearing those things. So in due course, they would become tattered and torn, and they would get more gifts, and those things will be gotten rid of. So now, basically, this is the simple comparison between the Indian and the European shawl. That means, in terms of the technique, in terms of the time it takes to make the shawl, just a few days to make one European shawl and long time to make Kashmiri shawl, the colors and dyes. Because you are making by hand, you can make it with hundreds of colors. In Akbar's time, he had documented 300 colors, all from natural substances. In Europe, they started using chemical dyes earlier on in 1830s, 1840s. In India, the chemical dyes came in 1860s. But till then, till 1870s, we were only using natural dyes. Kashmiris were very conservative. They were conservative with material. They wanted to use pashmina. They were conservative with their design, with the structure. They wanted to use the old traditional motifs. All the motifs, they remained popular. It was not as if Mughal period ended, so Mughal motifs ended and some other motif came. The popular motifs continued. So just alone by looking at the motif, you can't say this shawl is so old or whatever. Then it had a huge influence in Persia. Every part of a woman's and man's dress was made up of Kani shawl material. They had their own Kani industry, but the finest were going from Kashmir, from India. The thin and the fine and the light ones. And if you look at these lovers, the ladies' trousers, that's an early Afghan design, of the Bhuta. The khatras, the red and white stripes that we just saw, the man's jacket is of that. This Zant prints I have the same buta on fragment which is made into a shawl. Then that lady, she's wearing a skirt and a jacket made out of Kanimati. The cap is made out of that. She's got a scarf around her. The scarf is made out of that. Even men's dresses and their edging were made out of the striped khatras material. So by the time we come to the Sikh period, a kind of structure emerges, which then stays for quite some time with a large border with the bhutas, wide borders, then another secondary gallery, and the four corner ornaments. The Sikh period, as I said, starts with Maharaja Ranjit Singh, and these are three shawls that I've shown how the large center field from the Afghan period becomes smaller and smaller till it becomes a square. It doesn't disappear, it disappears in the Dogra period. And these are very fine shawls. This is called a Kirpa Rami. There was one Mr. Kirpa Ram who fathered this design. So sometimes shawls were known by the person who said make a shawl like this, and it became very popular. Basically they are paisleys, you can't see them, very thin, very intricately woven. And by the time you come to the Sikh period, the bhutas have dwindled from 12 to 11 to 8, 9, etc. to about 6 bhutas. And then, as you can see in the other one, there is a cypress and there are 4 bhutas. So it can be cypress bhuta like that. Cypress, all these trees, chinar, cypresses, many other poplars, they were all very much part of the flora and fauna that were. And Sikh period is known for its exuberance, its grand kind of. So Ranjit Singh, though he was busy fighting the British, he was fighting this guerrilla war, he was very fond of the shawls. He himself didn't wear too many, but wherever he went for war or whatever, the shawls moved with him. The tents were decorated with shawls, the palaces, everywhere, on the horses. The other thing that is important to know is that they made shawls and other things like bed covers. They made many, many things, even for Indian use, kambals, tablecloths, dastarkhans, people used to sit and smoke hookah. In Iran, for example, there was a room where a square shawl would be kept, and they would go and sit there after the meal and smoke. They'd sit on the shawl. And when the Shah's regime got overthrown by the Khomeini regime, a lot of Armenian Jews fled Iran and went to various, to England, France, America, and European countries. And they were the ones from whom I actually purchased a lot of shawls. There are lots of stories of intrigue and all kinds of things, but I won't go into them. Lot of variety, color, fineness, thickness, because shawls were also made for other purposes. And those were made from the seconds, thicker wools. For example, that moon shawl was probably made to be put on a wall, and so it's much thicker pashmina. So by this time, of course, the industry is in full swing in Europe, and it's copying the shawls, and it's slowly trying to introduce its colors and introduce its own motifs into the Kashmir shawl industry. But Kashmiris would make it sometimes. So here is this is called a 4 seasons shawls. It can be folded in triangle to highlight any one color of the 4. And that's a European, these are both Sikh period shawls. So these are long shawls of the Sikh period. That's a European shawl, that's an Indian shawl, very similar, only the central field color is different. That's a French one, in wool and silk, because they were not using pashmina. There are a handful of shawls made in pashmina. And to get that softness and the sheen of pashmina, they used silk in the paisley shawls, wool and silk. But they used all kinds of combinations, wool and wool, silk and wool, cotton and wool, etc., depending on the season, because shawls were worn throughout the year, and it had to adjust to all pockets. And in 1840s, during the Sikh period, there was a gentleman who visited from Constantinople, and he advised the shawl makers that to avoid the tax, why don't you start embroidering copies of the Jamawar shawl? Because that one person can sit. He has to have the cloth, needle and thread, and he can do it alone. And you will not come in the eye of the tax inspector. So that's how embroidery was born. They started first decorating the ends of the shawls with borders, with embroidery, and then those borders became larger and larger and more complicated. You can see that there is patchwork, small patches, and harlequin borders with multiple color strips which are joined together. Very elaborate jhalas, woven as well as embroidered. So one of the ways that we date shawls, one is by the buttas. The buttas, I told you, number of buttas, shape of the buttas, but also by jhalars, by the size of the jhalar. So it started by being plain, like you see in that top one, plain white, plain red. And then a little harlequin edge appears, with these bands, green, black, white, red, etc. Then those bands become wider, then little embroidery appears, then more embroidery. There was a French designer of shawls called Anton Berus, who designed shawls for many, many years. He was like our Hussain Saab, who had different periods, and this period of his life was called the jungle period. So they're very organic kind of shawls, and I've just taken the edge of one of them because it's a very unique edge. Okay, so these are now, we come to the Dogra period, and these are long shawls. As you can see in this also, there are two paisleys, in that also, S-shaped paisleys. And that's a close-up of the lower part of the design where you can see the crown. So you can make out by the symbolism on the shawl that it was made for somebody important. The Dogra period is interesting in the sense that, again, like in 1750s, all these dramatic revolutionary things happened. Something very dramatic happened 100 years later in the 1850s. So by this time, there were hundreds of thousands of looms making shawls. And shawls were being made as part of pashmina cloth. They're called patchwork shawls. They were like jigsaw puzzle. So they would weave sections of this. It would be broken up into sections. They would be woven as part of pashmina cloth, cut, and then joined together by Rafu to create the overall shawl. It was not possible to weave such an intricate shawl on one loom at one time. The other thing that happened was that there was a huge famine in which weavers are said to have died like flies, that of the 40,000, 4,000 survived. I mean, it was really a wipeout. The fashion in France changed. The bustle came. The shawl started looking very ugly worn on the bustle. So earlier the narrower dress, that fashion changed, and when the bustle and the big crinoline skirt came, so suddenly all the shawls were relegated to the boxes or used as piano covers or put on the sofa or whatever like that. Most of these shawls were being made for being exported to the West on order, and also for their clans. There was Franco-Prussian War. So the war, the famine, and the change of fashion in France led to an overnight collapse of the Kani shawl industry. It was at its peak. And of course, the weavers were being oppressed more and more as time was going by, because there was so much demand. The rulers, who were the Dogra kings, generals in Ranjit Singh's army, Kashmir was sold to them for some 13 lakhs or something, and they were paying tribute to the British. Only shawls for internal Indian consumption were being made. But at this time, the freedom struggle is also gathering momentum. So the market within India for shawls was also very limited. And so basically Kani goes out, and it was revived in 1984 in a weaving center in a village called Kani Hama near Srinagar. Now in all this sadness, something really fantastic emerged. And that was that all these Rajas and Nawabs had become really old. You know, like the Galoti kebab that was born because they couldn't chew. Similarly, the Dorukha was born. And the Kashmiri craftsmen who never wanted to stray from Pashmina and Tush, they started using silk to make the shawls lighter. These guys said, we can't wear these heavy shawls, we want something light. So they started using silk warp. The only difference between them is that this is what we call Pashmina Tani, meaning it's a doruka with Pashmina warp and weft. Very, very exquisite in green, reds basically and ochres on a white background. This shawl is there in many catalogs. This is just a section of the palla. This is another part of a palla. I've made it into a shawl, of a doruka, silk tani. This is an all-over one. Again, about 8 or 9 color bands diagonally with very intricate flowers and paisleys on it. Very, very beautiful. And this is a doruka palledar in embroidery. Exactly the same from front and back. These are the doruka shawls in their entirety. And the most amazing shawl, now these are I've shown the whole one because I'm very proud to have these. It's taken an arm and a leg to be able to find them and to buy them as well. So this has got about 8 different flowers, lines with 8 different flowers, with 5 little borders sewed together, very delicate. This is another Purmatan, what we call huge shawls. These are all those 3.5 meters or 1.5 meters. This is again something very, very special. There are just a few that exist in India and the world probably. It's called Doruka Doranga. This side is white. This side has got 5 different color panels, pink, orange, red. So they look like 2 different shawls, but this is the same shawl from front and back. Now what has happened here is that the back of this shawl, which was in any case double-sided, the entire ground has been covered by a couching embroidery stitch, which is done in a twill fashion to mimic weaving. So it looks like a woven doruka shawl, but it's actually all the part that doesn't have the design in it. So it looks like a completely different shawl. I mean, I've seen doruka dorangas, but they have the same design on both sides. And I mean, they look like 2 sides of a shawl. But this looks like a completely different shawl because there are 4, 5 colors here, and this just looks like a white shawl with a design. Then another thing happens just following the birth of the doruka shawl, and of course, the greatest demand came from Awadh. So there's something called, within the doruka shawl, there are designs which are called Lucknow Kar, for example, which are very special, very delicate, more Mughal kind of motifs, is the birth of the Hyderabadi shawl. India, the shawlwalas call it Hyderabadi. Shilpa Shah of Tapi collection calls it European market shawl because they were very popular, very bold designs, and very intricate also. This piece I have brought here to show you, there are about 13 to 14 different flowers, shaded, outlined. It looks like you're looking at a flower. It doesn't look like something that man's hand can copy in weaving. And this is a full Hyderabadi shawl. Again, you can't get the beauty of this. This is in my repertoire. Again, you can't find all over shawls. You can find jackets, some of them, or fragments. So 100 years later, there was a glut in the carpet market. So the carpet industry in India collapsed, the woolen carpet, Kashmir carpet industry, and they came back to make Kani shawls. So it's gone full circle. They came from Turkestan, the carpet weavers. They taught us how to weave Kani, and they put it in shawl. And now the carpet weavers are weaving. The only people who know now this technique are the carpet weavers. And there are many, many variations. These are the latest ones. They're trying to copy the Hyderabadi ones now with outlines and complex flowers. So more difficult. Takes 1.5 years rather than 1 year to make one shawl. And the embroidery is continuing willy-nilly despite what's happening in Kashmir. And of course, the crafts are vanishing, the craftsmen are vanishing. And so these are some exquisite examples of embroidered shawls. And coming back to the Najibabadi Rafugars, and there were some families that I showed you, the stalwart families who helped to purchase shawls for the museums and all. Lesson I learned in Switzerland, I said, like the handmade watches, I said, if you want to copy the best. You are the master of the needle. So now nobody wants to pay for Rafu. Even then they were being paid 300 rupees 15 years ago. Today also people are offering them 300 rupees. So 9,000 rupees, a man can't keep his body and soul together and feed children and educate them and have a roof over his head. So they've turned to embroidery, and I'm buying a lot of their shawls because they don't have anybody. They can't sell it. Once they make it, they can't sell it. So these are some of like this shawl was made in 1990s when we just started. And now they are doing a lot of orders are coming from Dubai and other places and other places, that's a zari shawl in silver and gold, tree of life design. And that one is a combination of another thing, experimenting with painting and embroidery, outlines in embroidery and painting called kalamkari. But this particular shawl has been made, the outlines are in Rafu. So it took about a year to make. But if you look at the back, all the outlines of the flowers are done in Rafu stitch. So this is another Hyderabadi patka. And thank you very much for being so patient.
Ms. Desai, on behalf of all the people who were here today, we thank you with all our hearts. And I hope we get a chance to interact with you, maybe for a longer duration, maybe for a day or something as a workshop. And we extend this as a request to you. Yes? Yes. Thank you so much. Thank you so very much. Thank you for joining us. Thank you very much.